Hey everyone, welcome. Have you ever thought about what would happen if a whole country just decided to throw out its most important book? Today, we're going to jump in a time machine and head back to France to see exactly what went down when they tried to do just that. I mean, think about it. Imagine your school just suddenly tossed out all the roles. It would be total chaos, right? Well, that is almost exactly what we're talking about here. But the rule book they got rid of was the Bible. So let's see what happened next. Okay, so for our story, the Bible has this really cool code name, the Two Witnesses. It's just a special way of talking about its two main parts, the Old and the New Testaments. So whenever you hear me say the Two Witnesses, you'll know exactly what we mean. It's our little inside scoop. You see, our story doesn't actually kick off with the revolution itself. Nope, it starts way, way before that, with this powerful book being, well, basically put in chains and hidden away from the very people who needed it the most. So for hundreds of years in France, the Bible was treated like some kind of hidden treasure. The people in charge kept it locked away, written in languages that ordinary people couldn't understand. Why? Well, they were afraid that if everybody could read it for themselves, their own power might get questioned. So this guiding light, it was kept hidden under a lid. So just look at how this all played out over time. For centuries, the Bible, our two witnesses, was kept in the shadows. But then things got way more intense. In the year 1793, right in the middle of the French Revolution, the government didn't just hide it, they made it illegal. They officially outlawed the Bible completely. So what happens when you throw out the rule book? Well, as you can probably guess, things started to go really, really wrong. France basically spiraled into a time of absolute chaos. Without the Bible's influence, this whole new idea started spreading like wildfire. The source material tells us that famous thinkers and leaders began using this slogan, crush the wretch. And when they said the wretch, they were talking about Jesus Christ. It was a total rejection of everything the Bible stood for. And the government took some pretty drastic steps. First, they officially abolished the worship of God. Then, they actually went around collecting Bibles to burn them in huge public bonfires. They even got rid of the weekly day of rest and started putting up signs in cemeteries that said death was just an eternal sleep, that there was nothing after. Our source lays out a really stark difference here. On one hand, the Bible taught things like justice and truth. But without it, France was filled with the exact opposites: total anarchy, violence, suspicion, and just fear. People were even scared of their own neighbors. And this whole period in French history got a very fitting name, the Reign of Terror. And believe me, it was exactly what it sounds like. Absolutely no one was safe. The prisons were overflowing, and the streets of Paris were just filled with horror as executions happened day after day. And right when you think things couldn't get any crazier, they did. It got so strange, it's almost hard to believe it's real. In their big effort to get rid of God, the leaders in France decided they needed to worship something new. And what they chose was, well, you're not going to believe this. In fact, a famous historian, Sir Walter Scott, looked back on this time and said one of their ceremonies was so bizarre it was basically unrivaled for absurdity. He was just baffled. Let's see what he was talking about. So what was this absurd ceremony? Well, the leaders declared France would no longer worship God, but would worship reason instead. And to represent reason, they picked an actual person, a dancing girl from the opera. They had this huge parade for her through the streets, brought her into the famous cathedral of Notre Dame, put her right on the altar, and the leaders of the nation bowed down to her. And right after that, they brought out piles and piles of Bibles and burned them. But the story doesn't end there in all that chaos, not at all. After all the fear and the terror, something started to change. The very book that had been chained up, banned, and burned was about to make a huge comeback. So after years of living through the Reign of Terror, the people of France were just exhausted. They looked around at the mess and realized that getting rid of all the old rules hadn't brought them freedom or happiness. It had just brought them fear. They knew something really important was missing. Then, in this totally stunning turnaround, the very same government that had banned the Bible passed a new law that allowed it again. And get this, it was just 3.5 years later. The two witnesses, which had been totally silenced, could finally be heard again. Now, check this out. Before all this happened, the Bible had been translated into about 50 languages around the world, which, sounds like a pretty good number. But just watch what happens next. After the French Revolution, there was an absolute explosion of interest in the Bible. It went from being in just 50 languages to being translated into many, many hundreds of languages and dialects all over the globe. It's like what happened in France woke up the rest of the world. All these new organizations, called Bible societies, started popping up in Britain, in America, all across Europe, and they all had one goal: get the Bible into the hands of as many people as possible. It was being honored like never before. Before the revolution, this famous French writer named Voltaire had made this really boastful claim. He proudly said that if it took 12 men to start Christianity, he would prove to the world that it only took one man, himself, to completely tear it down. Yeah, but look at this. The source material says that where there were maybe 100 copies of the Bible in Voltaire's time, after the revolution, there were 100,000. His big plan to destroy it had the exact opposite effect. It's kind of wild. So why does any of this matter? Well, it leaves us with this really powerful idea from our source. So many have tried to destroy the Bible, but it has always endured. It's like an anvil, that super heavy, strong block a blacksmith uses. Hammers can hit it again and again and again, but in the end, it's the hammers that break, while the anvil just stays put. So here's a final thought. What is it that makes this book so resilient?